Hello, and welcome to Unit 6, Asexual Reproduction, Day 4. And this is the last day of asexual reproduction. Today's aim is still, how does mitosis form identical daughter cells? That is the focus of our discussions on asexual reproduction, is that the offspring are identical because they come from only one parent. And we're going to contrast that with sexual reproduction coming up. But first, before we do that, let's go ahead and do these do now questions. So number 1. And if you want to, you can pause this video and go ahead and do these on your own and then check your answers after, but we could also do them together. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Marine sponges contain a biological catalyst, bringing us all the way back to Unit 2. You might remember that biological catalysts are enzymes, which are involved, proteins that are involved in speeding up chemical reactions in our bodies. So marine sponges contain a biological catalyst that blocks a certain step in the separation of chromosomes. Which cellular process would be directly affected by this catalyst? So separation of chromosomes is integral to the replication of DNA, which is the first step of mitosis. And the actual separation of chromosomes occurs in my favorite phase of mitosis, which usually looks a little something like this, which is when the chromosomes are being pulled apart into two separate cells to actually form the identical daughter cells. And if the marine sponge has an enzyme that blocks that occurring, that would impact mitosis. And marine sponges probably have that biological catalyst because if you've ever seen a marine sponge, they form a sort of large colony of sponges via budding, and they wouldn't necessarily want to fully separate the chromosomes because they're going to be one large organism. All right, but I didn't do any further research on that, so but everything else is true. So if you want to research marine sponges and come to class and tell us about why marine sponges contain a biological catalyst that blocks a certain step in the separation of chromosomes, go ahead and find an article and present it to the class for extra credit. Number 2, which two processes are involved in mitotic cell division? So in this case, we're talking about nuclear duplication and cytoplasmic division. So cytoplasm in a cell isn't necessarily getting larger when mitosis occurs, but it is dividing into two. It is splitting into two. And remember, the cytoplasm is that jelly-like substance that in which all the organelles of a cell are suspended in. But the nucleus does need to be copied because we need to make a copy of the DNA. And spermatogenesis is something that happens in sexual reproduction. That's the formation of sperm, and oogenesis as well as the formation of eggs. And this is just saying that the cytoplasm is also duplicating. That is not true. You might recognize this term cytoplasmic division from the reading on asexual reproduction, day 3. And remember, we use that word duplication when we're talking about replication of genetic material, especially because it's a duplicate, it's an exact copy, right? It's not just like splitting or reproduction. We're using that term to indicate it's an exact replica, an exact duplicate. Because the offspring in asexual reproduction are genetically identical. All right, number 3, the ability of cells to pass on their characteristics to new cells is most directly related to the ability of cytoplasm to excrete waste, effectors to respond to environmental changes, ribosomes to use energy, or chromosomes to replicate. So we're talking about the ability of cells to pass on their characteristics to new cells, and that's going to be chromosomes replicating. These would all impact the ability to maintain homeostasis, like not passing on characteristics. So you could eliminate those all, but those are all probably like homeostatic regulation. Those would all impact homeostatic regulation. So maintaining a stable internal environment. Because anything using energy in your body is part of your metabolism, which is part of how your body maintains a stable internal environment. Excreting waste, obviously, is how your body maintains a stable internal environment by getting rid of waste, and effectors responding to environmental changes is a big part of maintaining a stable internal environment, your ability to respond to an external environment and still maintain stability within. But chromosomes pass on genetic information, so that is our answer there. So that's A, D. All right, so now let's go on and talk a little bit about cell division in animal and plant cells. And we have discussed several times, but mitosis happens in us, in our bodies. That's how we replace cells. That's how we grow and develop. Mitosis also happens in plant cells, and mitosis can even happen in non-eukaryotic cells. So today we're going to be comparing and contrasting the two different types of eukaryotes, animals versus plants. So during cell division, the genetic material must be replicated and then divided equally. During mitosis, the chromosomes of a cell are divided into two equal groupings. Following mitosis, the cytoplasm and contents of the cell divide in a process called cytokinesis. So you can see here the genetic information is being replicated, and then the cytoplasm and the contents of the cell divide, right? So that's just the terminology that we use. Afterwards, each of the new cells has a complete set of chromosomes and organelles, just like the original cell. The two new cells are called daughter cells. The cells that they came from that no longer exists is called the parent cell. And you can see here in animal and plant cells, the primary difference has to do with that rigid outer layer of the plant cell, the cell wall. So because plant cells have this more rigid structure, in the case of an animal cell, we have the nuclear membrane dissolves and reform. That's really it. That's all that separates the contents of one cell from the contents of another cell. The cell membrane reforms during cytokinesis, and that's really not like a significant part of animal cell mitosis. But in the case of plant cells, they have this other layer, the cell wall. So in order to form a full new plant cell, there needs to be new cell wall forming. And that's what this cell plate is. So this is the primary difference between animal cell and plant cell mitosis, is the formation of this cell plate, which is really just the new part of the cell wall that will form in these two cells, sort of sealing off where no cell wall existed to create a new boundary between the nascent or brand new plant cells. So now let's go ahead and answer these questions. Why is there no longer a parent cell once the cell has undergone cell division? Well, if we go back to the passage and really think about this, right? So the parent cell divides into two new cells. They are genetically identical, but they are containing slightly less mass probably than the original cell because the genetic information duplicated, but as we discussed, the cytoplasm divided, forming two new cells that are identical to the parent cell, but the parent cell no longer exists. Why does it no longer exist? Because its contents are contained fully in the two identical daughter cells. The parent cell doesn't just bud a new child, a new offspring. Instead, the parent cell is destroyed through the process of cell division, but it lives on in these genetically identical offspring. So this parent cell doesn't exist anymore because it turns into the two identical daughter cells. And it's one of them isn't still the parent cell because they're both the same as each other. And this process, it sounds sort of like philosophically weird, but this process is happening inside of all of our bodies right now. What is the process of cells finally dividing into two called? So that is cytokinesis, the final split into two different cells. Cytokinesis, split, and move into two different cells. How is mitosis different in plant versus animal cells? Plant cells form a cell plate to reproduce the cell wall during telophase. And you can see it up there in the diagram. But this process of mitosis occurs all of the time in plants and animals. It is not remarkable, it is just life. Pretty cool stuff, but I still think it's pretty interesting. Now, let's talk about mitosis gone wrong. Cancer, cell division out of control. The disease known as cancer results from uncontrolled cell division. Cancer cells do not seem to follow the rules or recognize the signals that control normal cells division. Uncontrolled cell growth can occur in many different types of cells. As a result, there are different types of cancer, such as skin cancer and many others. There does not seem to be a single cause for all types of cancer. Factors that cause cancer do so by damaging or changing the cell's DNA. These factors include exposure of cells to harmful substances or mutations, such as certain chemicals and radiation. So, what is cancer? Cancer is uncontrolled cell division. And this is a major oversimplification because different types of cancer have different ways that they grow and develop. But what cancer is most basically and most simply is, let's say, for example, in your skin, you have all these genetically identical skin cells. They're chilling. Your skin and your lungs, for example, two places where it's really common for you to get cancer, are two places where your cells are regenerating and dividing all the time. And the more times that a cell divides, the more likelihood that there's going to be a mistake. And exposure of these cells to harmful substances, mutations that happen, which again are more likely to happen over repeated cell division, and exposure to certain chemicals and radiation can increase the likelihood of this problem happening. But you have all these identical skin cells, they're chilling, they're having a good time, no issues. They replicate as needed for growth and cell repair. But then you get one cell that was exposed to a harmful substance, was exposed to radiation, or just has a naturally occurring mutation. And that cell is different. right? So this is now a different cell. It's still kind of a skin cell, but it is a cancerous skin cell. And usually you see all these little cells are nice and round. That's usually how we depict animal cells. But cancer cells usually aren't round. They can be jagged or they look just a little bit different from a healthy cell. And so now that you have that one cancer cell, this is where the cell division out of control really becomes a problem. Unlike the skin cells that reproduce in a sort of orderly fashion, I tried to draw them in a nice orderly fashion, but this one looks like it's gone a little wonky, the second collection of cells. The cancer cell starts replicating all the time. So it won't stop. And eventually, because the cancer cells are replicating at a faster rate, they start to displace the other tissues, right? They start to displace the healthy skin cells and they begin dominating this area of tissue. And what this becomes is what is referred to as a tumor. And a tumor is just a collection of basically non-functional cells, right? Your skin acts as a barrier to protect you. It, helps with homeostatic regulation. All of these features of your skin, they're not being performed by the tumor, right? So your sweat glands, for example, might be getting displaced if you have a tumor in your skin. But usually, and the reason why I'm using skin cells as an example, usually what you get in the case of skin cancer, especially the early stages, is something that looks like a mole. And again, this is why the shape of cancer cells is sort of interesting, is I have, and I'm sure many of you have, the Zoom camera is not actually letting me show them because it's smoothing my face. Thanks, Zoom. But freckles and moles are very common, right? Freckles and moles are not cancer, but a cancerous mole will look different from a non-cancerous mole. Let's sort of just get like a different color, right? Which might just look like a different color, has a little bit of extra melanin that the other skin cells surrounding it don't have. That is slightly different presentation, but usually there is not a mutated DNA in the cells that make up a mole. However, a cancerous mole will have jagged edges and look quite different from a healthy, non-cancerous or a benign mole. And so, once you get a little bit older, at your age, it's not as much of a risk. But once you get a little bit older, especially if you spent a lot of time out in the sun without wearing sunscreen, sports as a kid, that's my cat Salem advocating that you get skin cancer screenings from a dermatologist to make sure that you don't have cancer. But other screenings are also important to prevent the development of cancer because, again, think about how this actual process, how cancer works. The tumor is growing. So if you stop this tumor's growth by getting screened and getting checked and getting the tumor removed, you can prevent the further development of cancer. You can excise or remove that tumor. And as long as you get all of it, as long as you get all of the cancerous cells, that same cancer will likely not impact you again. And usually when people have that same cancer impact them again, what happened was the surgery to remove the tumor wasn't successful, or the chemotherapy or whatever the person used to treat their cancer didn't fully eliminate the cancerous cells because they reproduce by mitosis. The cancer cells make more cancer cells. What is cancer? Cancer is uncontrolled cell division, and some of its contributing factors are harmful substances, like all of the chemicals found in cigarettes. I may have just spelled cigarette wrong, and if I did, I do apologize. Like cigarette smoke or vape smoke. Don't vape, kids. It's real bad for you. Some of its contributing factors are harmful substances like cigarette smoke or excess sun exposure UV radiation, which can cause mutations. All right. Well, to end on a cancerous note, a real bummer, and also exposure to things in your environment like asbestos. A lot of different toxic substances and toxic chemicals cause cancer because what cancer is the body's natural mechanism, cell division, gone haywire. So a cell that actually becomes cancerous has a mutation that was caused by some sort of exposure in the environment, usually, or potentially genetics. And once this mutation occurs, the cell is unrestrictedly replicating itself. It's not forming healthy tissue, it's forming instead, like we said, a tumor. So, all right, that's enough about that. Today's aim was how does mitosis form identical daughter cells? And then we talked a little bit about the differences in animal cell and plant cell mitosis, and we discussed how mitosis can go wrong. So that's all I have for you today. Have a super fantastic day, and I'll see you guys all tomorrow on Zoom. Bye.